I'm Avery, 36 female. I live in a city that's always moving, a place where ambition is the air you breathe. My apartment is my sanctuary, a minimalist space that starkly contrasts with the cluttered, over-decorated house I grew up in. I'm a senior software engineer, a job that requires logic, precision, and the ability to see patterns where others see chaos, a skill I hone not in a classroom, but in my own family. For my entire life, I've been the reliable, invisible daughter, while my sister Brielle has been the star. But a secret I've kept for years is about to change everything, and the fallout will be more spectacular than anyone could have imagined. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. Growing up, our house was a stage, and Brielle was the perpetual headliner. My mother, Alina, a retired interior designer, treated our home like a portfolio, and Brielle was her masterpiece. Every room had a theme, every piece of furniture a story, but the unspoken theme of our family was Brielle's brilliance. She was 2 years younger, but in the family hierarchy, she was light years ahead. She was the beautiful one, the charming one, the one whose laughter was the soundtrack of our home. My father, Robert, a financial advisor who managed other people's futures with meticulous care, seemed to invest all his emotional stock in her. My role was different. I was the quiet one, the studious one, the one who fixed the Wi-Fi and did my parents' taxes as soon as I was old enough. My achievements were met with a polite, almost absent-minded nod. A perfect report card was nice, honey. Graduating top of my class in computer science was a good, stable choice. It was as if my successes were expected, like a utility bill being paid on time, necessary, but not exciting. Brielle's, on the other hand, were celebrated with the kind of fanfare usually reserved for national holidays. When she won a regional dance competition at 16, my parents threw a party for 50 people. When I got a full scholarship to a prestigious university, my dad said, "Well, that's a relief for the wallet." The disparity wasn't just in the big moments, it was woven into the very fabric of our daily lives. At dinner, the conversation would orbit around Brielle's social life, her friends, her latest creative project. She decided to become a social media influencer, a career choice my parents, who barely understood the internet, championed with unwavering enthusiasm. "She's building a brand," my mother would say, her eyes gleaming with pride as she showed relatives Brielle's latest post, a carefully curated photo of her holding a sponsored tea. Meanwhile, I'd be talking about a complex coding project I was leading, and my father would interrupt to ask Brielle if she wanted more potatoes. It wasn't malicious, not in a way you could easily call out. It was a quiet, pervasive form of neglect, a constant, low-humming reminder of my secondary status. Aunt Fiona, my mom's sister and a university professor, was the only one who seemed to see it. She was my port in the storm. "Don't let them define your worth, Avery," she'd tell me over coffee, her gaze sharp and understanding. "Your mind is a remarkable thing. They're just blinded by the glitter." She was right. Brielle glittered. She had a way of pulling all the light in a room toward her, leaving everyone else in the shadows. And I had long since learned to live in those shadows, finding a strange sort of comfort in their predictability. The older we got, the more pronounced the difference became. I moved out, built a career, and became financially independent with a fierce, almost desperate determination. Brielle, meanwhile, remained financially tethered to our parents. They co-signed the lease on her trendy downtown apartment, paid for her car, and frequently invested in her influencer career, which mostly seemed to involve buying her new clothes and tech for her videos. I never asked for a dime. Pride was the one thing I had that was entirely my own, and I guarded it jealously. I told myself it didn't matter. I had my own life, my own successes. I was a senior engineer at a leading tech firm, respected by my peers, and earning a salary that afforded me a comfortable life. But the echoes of that lesser love never quite faded. They were there in the moments I'd call my parents with good news, only to have the conversation rerouted to Brielle's latest minor drama within minutes. They were there in the family photos, where Brielle was always in the center, radiant, while I stood slightly to the side, a supporting character in my own family's story. The dynamic was so entrenched that I'm not even sure my parents were conscious of it anymore. To them, it was just the natural order of things. Brielle needed them more, so she received more. I was self-sufficient, so I was left to my own devices. They saw it as practical. I saw it as a profound and painful imbalance. A few years ago, I stumbled upon an opportunity that would change my life, a secret I kept nestled in the securest vaults of my mind. A small, struggling startup I had done some freelance work for in my early 20s was developing a revolutionary data compression algorithm. They couldn't pay me much, so they offered me a significant stake in company equity instead. I saw the potential in the technology, a spark of genius that others had overlooked. I took the deal, filed the paperwork away, and mostly forgot about it as I climbed the corporate ladder. But in the background, that little startup didn't die. It survived, it evolved, and then it exploded. The algorithm they'd created became the backbone of a new cloud storage solution that was acquired by a tech giant in a deal so massive it made headlines. And my forgotten equity, my sliver of a struggling company, was suddenly worth a fortune. A life-altering, mind-boggling fortune. I was, on paper and in my bank account, a multimillionaire. I told no one, not a soul. I didn't change my lifestyle. I kept my job, my apartment, my quiet, orderly life. The money was my secret, my shield, my silent validation. It was the one thing that was mine, untouched by the family dynamic that had defined me for so long. It was the ultimate proof that I could succeed on my own terms without their praise or their attention. And for a while, that was enough. But I always knew, in the back of my mind, that a secret of this magnitude couldn't stay hidden forever. The only question was when, and how, the truth would finally come to light. The catalyst for the implosion came in the form of a crisp, cream-colored envelope. It arrived on a Tuesday, nestled between a takeout menu and a bill. It was from my parents, and the formal stationery felt oddly cold. Inside was a letter, not a card, signed by both my mother and father. It was a notification, written in my father's precise, businesslike hand, informing me of a significant financial decision they had made. They had decided to give Brielle the down payment for a house. Not just any house, but a sprawling, 4-bedroom property in a chic, upscale neighborhood, the kind of place influencers dream of using as a backdrop. The amount they were giving her was staggering, a gift of $300,000. The letter explained, in calm, rational terms, that they saw this as an investment in her future, a way to give her the stability she needed to grow her brand. They felt she had earned it, with her hard work and dedication. The letter then addressed me directly. "We know you're doing very well for yourself, Avery," it read. "You've always been so independent and responsible. We are immensely proud of you for that, and because you are so financially secure, we know you'll understand why we're choosing to help Brielle in this way. She needs a leg up, and you, thankfully, do not." The letter ended with a cheery sign-off about seeing me at the upcoming family dinner. I read the letter 3 times, the words blurring into a meaningless jumble. It wasn't the money. I didn't need their money, I had more than I could ever spend. It was the casual, dismissive way they had written me off. It was the assumption that my success meant I didn't need their support, their consideration, or even a simple conversation. I was not a daughter in this equation. I was a balanced budget, a problem already solved. They hadn't called. They hadn't asked. They had simply informed me of a decision that laid the family hierarchy bare, in the most brutal way possible. My independence, the very thing I had worked so hard to achieve, was being used as a justification for my exclusion. It was a punishment for my competence. The rage that simmered inside me was cold and sharp. It wasn't the fiery, explosive anger that Brielle was known for. It was a deep, glacial fury that had been building for years, fed by 1,000 tiny slights and a lifetime of being overlooked. This wasn't just a down payment, it was a legacy. It was my parents cementing their preference in the most permanent way they knew how, with money. Aunt Fiona called me that evening, her voice laced with a knowing concern. I heard about the house, she said softly. Your mother told me, how are you? I was silent for a moment, the letter lying on my coffee table like a piece of evidence. I'm fine, I lied, my voice tight. She didn't buy it. No, you're not, she said gently. You've been pushed aside again, haven't you? This is more than a snub, Avery. This is a statement. She was the only one who understood the nuances, the history that gave this act its weight. I decided to go to the family dinner. Part of me wanted to scream, to wave the letter in their faces and demand an explanation. But another, colder part of me knew it would be pointless. They wail. Meet my anger with bewildered placidity. They would tell me I was being sensitive, that I was twisting their good intentions. They wouldn't understand because they had never tried to. So I went, armed with a quiet resolve. I would watch, I would listen, and I would let them show me exactly who they were. The dinner was at my parents' house, the stage for so many of Brielle's triumphs. She was, of course, the guest of honor. She floated around the living room, a glass of champagne in her hand, describing her new house in excruciating detail. It has the most amazing natural light for my videos, she gushed, and a kitchen that is just to die for. I can't wait to host my first brand collaboration there. My parents beamed, their faces masks of adoration. My father clapped her on the shoulder. Nothing but the best for my girl, he said, his voice thick with emotion. He didn't even glance in my direction. I sat on the armchair in the corner, a ghost at the feast. I watched Brielle perform, my mother and father her captive audience. She spoke of her future as if it were a preordained success, a destiny underwritten by her parents' generosity. There was no gratitude, only a casual, deeply ingrained entitlement. She believed she deserved this, that it was her birthright. And my parents, with their checkbook and their blind adoration, had confirmed it. The most telling moment came during dessert. My mother, flushed with excitement, brought out a cake decorated with a picture of Brielle's new house. As she cut the slices, she looked at me, a flicker of what might have been guilt in her eyes. Avery, dear, I hope you're not upset about all this, she said, her voice a little too bright. We just know how much Brielle struggles. This influencer world is so competitive. You have a stable career, a pension. You're set. I'm not upset, I said, my voice eerily calm. And in that moment, it was true. The anger had receded, replaced by a profound, chilling clarity. They had made their choice. They had drawn a line in the sand, and I knew, with absolute certainty, on which side I stood. I was the safety net, the responsible one they never had to worry about. I was the solid ground that allowed them to build Brielle a castle in the sky. I politely finished my cake, thanked them for dinner, and left early. As I drove home through the glittering city lights, the decision formed in my mind, not as a product of anger, but of a cold, hard logic they would have been proud of. They had made a statement with their money. It was time for me to make one with mine. The secret I had been guarding was no longer a shield. It was about to become a weapon. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I was finally ready to use it. The echoes of a lesser love were about to be drowned out by the roar of a fortune they couldn't even begin to comprehend. The plan began to crystallize not with a bang, but with a bug. A few weeks after the disastrous family dinner, I was working late on a complex piece of code for my company. It was a side project, something I'd been tinkering with in my spare time. It was a personal finance application, an aggregator designed to pull together all of a person's financial data, bank accounts, investments, properties, debts, into one clean, intuitive interface. I was building it mostly for myself, a way to manage my own considerable and complex assets without having to log into a dozen different portals. It was a passion project, a puzzle I enjoyed solving. As I was stress testing the account linking feature, I decided to use my father's online banking portal as a test case. I knew his login details from the years I'd spent managing his and my mother's online accounts and filing their taxes. It felt a little sneaky, but it was for a benign purpose. I just needed to see if my application's API could handle the security protocols of a major national bank. I entered his credentials, ran the script, and expected it to either connect or fail. What I didn't expect was for it to connect and then, due to a minor glitch in my own code, pull a data file that was far more extensive than it should have. It wasn't just his account balance. It was a full transaction history, a list of scheduled payments, and, most interestingly, a folder of linked documents from his cloud storage that the banking app had access to for financial planning purposes. It was a security flaw in their system, a backdoor my aggregator had inadvertently slipped through. My first instinct was to close it, to pretend I hadn't seen it. It was a breach of privacy, an ethical line I had never intended to cross. But then I saw a file name that made me pause. Family Legacy Plan Draft. Curiosity, cold and sharp, overrode my professional ethics. My heart hammered against my ribs as I clicked on it. It was a detailed financial plan, a roadmap for my parents' estate. And as I scrolled through the pages, the casual cruelty of the Dow. End payment for Brielle's house snapped into sharp, horrifying focus. It wasn't just a one-off gift. It was part of a much larger and much more skewed strategy. The document, drafted by my father, laid out their entire financial future and their plans for their inheritance. Their assets, their house, their savings, their investment portfolios, totaled around $2 million. A respectable sum, the result of a lifetime of careful saving. But it was the distribution that made my breath catch in my throat. The plan allocated 75% of their total net worth to Brielle. The remaining 25% was allocated to me. I scrolled through the justifications, my father's neat, bullet-pointed logic laid bare. Brielle's career is less stable and her income potential is unpredictable. She will require significant financial support to maintain her standard of living. And next to my name, Avery has a high-income career and has demonstrated excellent financial independence. Her need is minimal. This distribution is based on need, not affection. Need, not affection. The words were a punch to the gut. All my life, my competence had been a source of quiet pride. Now I saw it through their eyes. It was a liability. It was the reason I was being written out of my own family's legacy. The $300,000 for Brielle's house wasn't a gift. It was an advance on her lopsided inheritance. They were slowly draining the estate to fund her lifestyle, and they had already decided that I was not entitled to the same. The document was a treasure trove of financial details. It listed every account, every investment, every asset. And as I scanned the list, something else caught my eye. A series of regular payments to a financial institution I didn't recognize. They weren't huge sums, a few $1,000s every month, but they were consistent, stretching back years. The payment description was vague, investment services. It was odd. My father managed his own investments. It was his profession, his pride. Why would he be paying another firm? The fortuitous glitch in my code had opened a door I never knew existed. I had stumbled upon a secret, a blueprint of my family's private, calculated betrayal. The initial shock gave way to a cold, clear-headed resolve. The anger was still there, a low, burning ember, but it was now focused. My father, the meticulous financial planner, had made a critical error. He had underestimated me. He had assumed I would remain the quiet, compliant daughter, ignorant of the calculations being made behind my back. I saved a copy of the family legacy plan to a secure, encrypted drive. I fixed the bug in my application, ensuring the backdoor I had slipped through was sealed, both for my own protection and to erase my digital footprints. I sat back in my chair, the glow of my monitor illuminating the dark room. The game had changed. I was no longer just a spectator to my family's dynamics. I was a player, and I had just been handed the rulebook. The vague investment services payments gnawed at me. It was a loose thread in my father's carefully woven financial tapestry, and I, a person who spent her days untangling complex systems, felt an overwhelming urge to pull on it. My investigation was no longer just a matter of curiosity. It was a matter of justice. The glitch had given me the what. Now, I needed to find out the why. And I had a sinking feeling that the answer would be far uglier than a simple, lopsided inheritance plan. The foundation of my family was built on a series of quiet, carefully constructed lies, and I was about to pour a tanker of gasoline on it and light a match. The mysterious payments became my obsession. The name of the receiving firm was Oakshore Wealth Management. A quick search revealed it was a boutique investment house, small, exclusive, and very discreet. It wasn't the kind of place my father, a man who prided himself on his mainstream, by-the-book investment strategies, would typically use. It smelled of something hidden, something he didn't want my mother or anyone else to see on a standard bank statement. My first step was to leverage my professional skills. I was a software engineer, and the digital world was my native territory. I started by doing a deep dive on Oakshore. Their digital footprint was minimal, their security tight, but nothing is impenetrable. I spent a weekend building a sophisticated web crawler, a piece of software designed to scrape public records, social media mentions, and digital archives for any mention of Oakshore and my father's name. It was a digital needle in a haystack, but I had the patience and the processing power to search. While my crawler worked, I turned to the human element, Aunt Fiona. I met her for lunch at a quiet bistro, far from the prying eyes of the family. I didn't tell her about the document I'd found. I couldn't risk implicating her or revealing my methods, but I needed her insight. She was the Miley historian, the one who saw the cracks beneath the gilded surface my mother worked so hard to maintain. Aunt Fiona, I began carefully, stirring my iced tea. I've been thinking about Dad's finances. He's always so proud of how he manages everything himself. Has he ever mentioned working with other advisors? Her eyes sharpened with interest. That's an odd question. No, never. Your father considers himself a lone wolf in that regard. He thinks most other advisors are just glorified salesmen. Why do you ask? Just curious, I said, trying to sound casual. He seems more stressed about money lately, despite being retired. That struck a chord. He does, doesn't he? She mused. I thought it was just about Brielle. She's a constant drain, bless her heart. Your mother encourages it, of course. She lives vicariously through Brielle's glamorous life. She took a sip of her wine. But there was something a few years back, a strange time. Your father made a series of investments that went south, badly south. It was right after the 2008 crash when everyone was panicking. He thought he'd found a can't-miss opportunity to recover his losses quickly. What kind of opportunity? I pressed, my heart starting to beat faster. I never got the details, she said, frowning. He was very secretive about it and very ashamed when it fell apart. He lost a significant amount of your parents' retirement fund. I think your mother never knew the full extent of it. He would have done anything to hide that from her. It would have shattered her image of him as the infallible provider. The pieces began to click into place. A massive loss. A secret to be kept at all costs. A series of discreet payments to an outside firm. My web crawler finished its run that night, and the results were illuminating. It hadn't breached Oakshore's security, but it had found a link, a faint but undeniable connection. It had cross-referenced public business filings and found that one of the founding partners of Oakshore Wealth Management had previously worked at a now-defunct investment bank. This bank had been at the center of a scandal involving high-risk, speculative real estate funds, the very kind that had imploded after 2008. And my father's name appeared on a list of investors in a class action lawsuit filed against that bank. The picture was becoming clearer, and it was uglier than I had imagined. My father hadn't just made a bad investment. He had gambled away a huge chunk of his family's security. The payments to Oakshore weren't for investment services. They were hush money. Or, more likely, he was desperately trying to recoup his losses through a high-risk manager, throwing good money after bad in a frantic attempt to patch a hole in his legacy before my mother found out. This changed everything. The lopsided inheritance wasn't just about favoring Brielle. It was about desperation. He was funneling money to her now, securing her future, because he knew the total value of the estate was compromised. The $2 million I'd seen in his plan wasn't the whole story. It was the projected value if his secret, high-risk gambles paid off. But if they didn't, the reality was likely much, much grimmer. The final piece of the puzzle required me to cross a line I had sworn I wouldn't. I needed to see the details of the Oakshore account. It was a risky and likely illegal move, but the justification burned in my gut. This wasn't just about my inheritance anymore. It was about the truth. I spent a week meticulously researching Oakshore's online portal. I found a vulnerability, a tiny flaw in their password reset protocol. It was a long shot, but it was possible. Using a masked IP address and a temporary email, I initiated a password reset for an account I hypothesized was my father's, using his personal details to answer the security questions. To my astonishment, it worked. The system, flawed as it was, sent a reset link to the temporary email. My hands were shaking as I clicked it. I was in. The account was a wasteland. A history of massive losses, of desperate trades, of fees bleeding the account dry. My father had lost nearly $500,000. The retirement fund he and my mother had spent 40 years building was bleeding out in a secret, high-risk account, and he was still funneling thousands of dollars into it every month, chasing a win that would never come. The truth was a bitter pill. My father wasn't a monster. He was a fool. A proud, foolish man who had made a catastrophic mistake and was now cannibalizing his family's future to cover it up. His favoritism for Brielle wasn't just born of affection, it was amplified by guilt. He was trying to give her everything now because he was terrified there would be nothing left to give her later. And I, the responsible, self-sufficient daughter, was the sacrifice he was willing to make to maintain his lie. I logged out, cleared my cache, and erased every trace of my Diggy. Tal intrusion. The information sat on my encrypted drive, a ticking time bomb. The investigation was over. I had unraveled the legacy of lies. Now it was time for the plan, and it wouldn't be about exposing him or ruining him. That was too simple, too messy. My revenge would be surgical, precise, and utterly devastating. It would be built not on revealing his failure, but on showcasing my success. A success so monumental it would make his frantic, secret scrambling look like a child playing with pennies. The knowledge of my father's secret financial ruin didn't fill me with pity. It filled me with a cold, clear purpose. His betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was a calculated financial risk with me as the collateral damage. He had gambled with my mother's security and written me off as a sunk cost. My plan, therefore, had to be rooted in the very thing he had failed at: financial mastery. I would not tear him down. I would build an empire so tall it would cast a shadow over his entire life. For the next year, I became the silent architect of my new reality. The first rule was to maintain the facade. To my family, I was still Avery, the reliable, slightly boring software engineer. I went to the obligatory family dinners, listened to Brielle's endless monologues about brand collaborations and follower counts, and nodded politely as my parents fretted over her latest manufactured crisis. I was a ghost in my own life, playing a part while the real me was working tirelessly behind the scenes. My $20 million windfall was not a lottery ticket, it was seed capital. I didn't let it sit idle. I dove into the world of venture capitalism, but from the shadows. I spent my nights and weekends researching emerging tech startups, focusing on niche areas I understood deeply: AI-driven cybersecurity, decentralized data storage, quantum computing. My background gave me an edge. I could read the code, understand the architecture, and see the potential in a way traditional investors couldn't. I started small, making a series of anonymous angel investments through a shell corporation I'd set up with the help of a discreet but brilliant team of lawyers and financial advisors. My primary advisor, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Eleanor Vance, ironically sharing my mother's name, but none of her disposition, helped me structure everything for maximum growth and minimum visibility. "You're a ghost investor," she told me during one of our encrypted calls. "Your name appears on nothing. Your money does the talking." The work was exhilarating. It was the ultimate application of my skills. I was analyzing complex systems, identifying patterns, and making calculated risks. But unlike my father's wild gambles, my risks were based on deep, exhaustive research. My first few investments were modest but successful. A cybersecurity firm I backed landed a major government contract. A data storage startup was acquired by a competitor, and my initial investment quadrupled. My fortune began to grow, quietly and consistently. While my financial empire expanded, I made a crucial move in my personal life. I quit my job. I didn't announce it with any fanfare. I told my family I was taking a sabbatical, that I was burned out from the corporate grind and was going to do some freelance consulting. It was the perfect cover story. It explained my flexible schedule and played into their narrative of me as the sensible one who would never do anything too risky. "A little break is a good idea, dear," my mother said, her attention already drifting back to the floral arrangements for Brielle's upcoming birthday party. The freelance consulting was, in reality, managing my burgeoning investment portfolio. I was my own boss, my own analyst, my own CEO. I worked from a sleek, minimalist home office that my family never saw. I built a life that was entirely my own, separate from their world of perceived glamour and hidden desperation. The contrast between my reality and Brielle's was stark. While I was closing a 7-figure deal on a Thursday morning, she would be posting a tearful video about the stress of finding the perfect filter for a sponsored post. While I was analyzing market trends that would make me another $1 million, my parents were wiring her money to cover her credit card debt, which she'd racked up buying designer clothes to maintain her brand. The temptation to reveal my success was immense, but I resisted. The power was in the silence. The power was in their ignorance. My revenge wasn't going to be a single, explosive confrontation. It was going to be a slow, creeping realization. I was building a new reality, and when the time was right, I would simply invite them into it and let them choke on the cognitive dissonance. The final piece of my plan was a physical manifestation of my success. I began working with an architect to design a house. Not just a house, but a statement. It was a stunning piece of modern architect. "You're a glass and steel marvel perched on a hill overlooking the city." It was everything my mother's overdecorated, traditional home was not. Clean, bold, and unapologetically modern. It was a home built not with inherited taste, but with a fortune earned through intelligence and foresight. The construction was done under a project name, with all contracts handled by my corporation. No one knew who the owner was. As the house neared completion, I knew the time was approaching. The catalyst would be my parents' 40th wedding anniversary. They were planning a large party, a celebration of their long, and in my mother's eyes, perfect partnership. It would be the ideal stage. All the players would be there. My clueless parents, my entitled sister, and the extended family who had borne witness to my secondary status for decades. I had spent a year as a ghost, a silent architect of my own destiny. I had built a fortune that dwarfed my father's wildest dreams and his most devastating losses. I had built a home that was a testament to my success. I had all the pieces in place. All that was left was to choose the perfect moment to pull back the curtain and let the light in. They had written me off as a quiet, stable, and ultimately unimportant part of their story. They had no idea I was the one holding the pen. The anniversary party was exactly as I'd expected, a monument to my mother's carefully curated image of a perfect life. It was held at an expensive country club. The decorations were opulent, the guest list was long, and Brielle was, as always, positioned near the center of every conversation, documenting the entire event for her followers. She wore a ridiculously expensive dress, a gift from our parents, and floated through the room with the unshakable confidence of someone who has never had to pay a bill in her life. I arrived quietly, dressed in a simple, elegant black dress that cost more than Brielle's entire outfit but whispered its quality rather than shouting it. I mingled politely, accepting the usual patronizing comments from relatives. "Still doing that computer stuff, Avery?" one uncle asked. "Good for you. A nice, steady job." I just smiled. The main event was the speeches. My father stood up, glass in hand, and delivered a long, rambling tribute to my mother. He spoke of their journey, their partnership, their shared values. He painted a picture of a life built on trust and careful planning. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. He looked old and tired, the strain of his secret life visible in the lines around his eyes. Then he turned his attention to his daughters. "And I have to thank my 2 wonderful girls," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. He looked first at Brielle. "To Brielle, my firecracker, who reminds me every day to live life to the fullest. Your creativity and passion are an inspiration." The crowd applauded. Brielle beamed, raising her glass. Then he looked at me. His gaze was brief, almost an afterthought. "And to Avery," he said, "my steady one, thank you for always being so responsible. It's a comfort to know we never have to worry about you." A smattering of polite applause followed. It was the story of my life, summarized in a single, dismissive toast. The comfort of not having to worry about me. This was the moment. This was the opening I had been waiting for. After the speeches wound down, I approached the small stage where a microphone had been set up for a DJ. I asked him if I could borrow it for a moment to make a special announcement. He obliged, and a hush fell over the room as I tapped the mic. "Hi, everyone," I began, my voice clear and steady. "I promise I won't take long. I just wanted to add my own tribute to my parents on their 40th anniversary." I turned to them. They looked surprised, but pleased. I was rarely one for public speaking. "Mom, Dad, you've built a life together based on certain principles. Hard work, stability, and planning for the future. You taught me the value of being independent, of standing on my own 2 feet. And Dad, as a financial advisor, you especially taught me that numbers don't lie. They tell a story, a clear, unbiased story." I saw a flicker of unease in my father's eyes. He had no idea what was coming, but he knew my tone. It was the tone I used when I had found a flaw in his logic. "You taught me so well, in fact," I continued, my voice gaining strength, "that I took those lessons to heart. While I was being the steady one, the one you never had to worry about, I was also taking care of my own future. About a decade ago, I took a risk on a small tech startup. I invested my time and a little bit of my savings. It was a long shot, but I believed in the technology." I let that hang in the air for a moment. The room was silent. "A few years ago, that startup was acquired. The numbers, as they say, were significant. So, as my anniversary gift to you, Mom and Dad, I wanted to do something special. I wanted to finally give you the one thing you've worked so hard for: true financial security." I pulled a card from my small clutch purse. "I know things have been difficult since the losses from the 2008 crash," I said, looking directly at my father. His face went ashen. It was as if I had physically struck him. My mother looked at him in utter confusion. "Losses? Robert, what is she talking about?" I didn't give him time to answer. "So, I've set up a trust for you. It will generate an income for the rest of your lives that is more than enough to cover all your expenses and then some. It will also pay off your mortgage completely. Consider it my thank you for teaching me to be so independent." The silence in the room was deafening. No one knew how to react. My mother was staring at my father, her face a storm of bewilderment and dawning horror. Brielle looked like she had short-circuited. She was the one who broke the silence. "A trust? What are you talking about, Avery? You're taking a sabbatical because you're broke. You can't afford a trust." She scoffed, her voice shrill. I gave her a calm, cool smile. "My sabbatical is what some people might call retirement, Brielle. The investment I mentioned, it did quite well. The final valuation of my shares was just over $20 million. A collective gasp went through the room. $20 million. The word seemed to hang in the air, glittering and impossible. My father looked like he was going to collapse. My mother was openly weeping, though I couldn't tell if the tears were from shock, relief, or betrayal. Brielle's face was a mask of disbelief, which quickly curdled into pure, unadulterated rage. This was not possible. This did not compute. Her entire worldview, a carefully constructed hierarchy with her at the pinnacle, had just been vaporized. "You're lying," she shrieked, taking a step toward me. "You've been lying to us this whole time. You had all that money and you just sat there watching us, watching me struggle." "Struggle?" I asked, my voice dangerously soft. "Is that what you call it? Having your rent, your car, your life subsidized by parents who were secretly drowning in debt? I wasn't lying, Brielle. I was just living my life. A life I built myself. You were so busy being the star of the show, you never bothered to look in the wings to see what I was doing." I turned back to the crowd. And since I'm sharing good news, I said, my voice bright again, I'd also like to invite you all to my housewarming party next month. I've just finished building a new home. You've probably seen it, the big glass house up on Cedar Hill. That was the final blow. Everyone knew that house. It had been the talk of the town for a year, a mysterious architectural marvel. The idea that it belonged to me, quiet, boring Avery, was too much to process. Brielle let out a sound that was somewhere between a sob and a scream. Her perfect, curated world had shattered into a million pieces. The spotlight she had hogged her whole life had just been turned on me, and it was blinding. She turned and fled the room, her social media empire momentarily forgotten in the face of a reality she couldn't filter or spin. I looked at my parents. My father wouldn't meet my eyes. My mother just stared at me, a stranger in her daughter's body. The numbers had spoken, and they had told a story of secrets, of lies, and of a silent, spectacular revenge. The party was over. The weeks following the anniversary party were a maelstrom of fractured communication and seismic shifts. The story of my $20 million revelation and my parents' secret financial troubles spread through our extended family and social circle like wildfire. I became a figure of mythic proportions overnight, the quiet nerd who was secretly a tech mogul. The narrative they had built around me for 36 years had been demolished, and they didn't know how to rebuild it. My parents didn't speak to me for 2 weeks. The trust I had set up was active, the mortgage was paid off, and a substantial sum of money was deposited into their account, but they didn't touch it. I think they were paralyzed by the implications. Their entire relationship had been built on my father's role as the steady provider and my mother's role as the gracious manager of their perfect life. I had exposed the lie at the heart of it all. I had saved them, but I had also humiliated them. When my mother finally called, her voice was small, stripped of its usual commanding tone. "Why, Avery?" she asked, the question hanging between us. "Why did you do it like that, in front of everyone?" "Because you only listen when there's an audience," I replied, the words coming out colder than I intended. For my entire life, my successes were private, whispered, while Brielle's were shouted from the rooftops. I decided to try it her way for a change. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. For the first time, I do. "And think she had a response. The script she had been following for decades had run out of lines. My father never called. He couldn't face me. His pride, the very thing that had driven him to hide his failures, was now the wall between us. Aunt Fiona told me he was devastated, not by the loss of his role as the family patriarch, but by the exposure of his shame. He had been living a double life, and I had merged the two without his permission. The trust I had given them was, in his eyes, not a gift but a judgment, a permanent, interest-bearing monument to his failure and my success. The most spectacular fallout, however, came from Brielle. Her meltdown at the party was just the beginning. She tried to spin the story to her followers, of course. She posted a rambling, tearful video about a family betrayal, painting herself as the victim of a manipulative, secretive sister who had hidden her wealth and mocked her struggles. It was a desperate attempt to regain control of the narrative, but it backfired spectacularly. Anonymous comments, likely from relatives who had been at the party, began to appear, telling the real story. That Brielle had been living off her parents, who were secretly in debt, while her rich sister had bylaid them out. The story twisted from a tale of sisterly betrayal into one of epic entitlement. Her followers, the audience she had so carefully cultivated, began to turn on her. She was a fraud, a trust fund baby without the trust fund. Her brand, built on a flimsy foundation of aspirational wealth, crumbled almost overnight. Sponsors dropped her. Her follower count plummeted. She had built her identity on a reflection, and I had shattered the mirror. A month later, I hosted my housewarming party. I invited everyone, including my parents and Brielle. I knew they wouldn't come, but the invitation was a final, symbolic gesture. Aunt Fiona came, of course. She walked through the soaring glass walls of my new home, a proud, knowing smile on her face. "You did it, kid," she said, squeezing my arm. "You built your own table, and it's a hell of a lot bigger than theirs." The house was filled with my chosen family, friends, colleagues, the brilliant minds from the startups I was funding. It was a room full of people who saw me for who I was, not for the role I had been assigned. Looking out over the glittering city from my balcony, I felt a sense of peace I had never known. The anger, the resentment that had been my fuel for so long, had finally burned away. In its place was a quiet, solid sense of self. My parents eventually started using the money from the trust. They had no choice. They sold their oversized house, a silent admission that the life they had been projecting was no longer sustainable. They downsized to a smaller condo and live a quiet, comfortable life. Our relationship is polite. Distant, we speak on holidays. They are grateful for the money, but I don't think they will ever forgive me for the truth. Brielle disappeared from the internet. The last I heard, she had moved to a different city and was working in a boutique, a job that required her to show up at a specific time and answer to a boss. A normal life. I sometimes wonder if she will ever understand the damage her entitlement caused, or if she will forever see herself as the victim. I never set out to destroy my family. I just wanted to be seen. But in a family built on illusions, sometimes the truth is a wrecking ball. They had defined my worth by my perceived need, and in the end, I had shown them that my greatest strength was never needing them at all. My new definition of family is not one of blood, but of respect. It's a family I built myself, in a house I built myself, with a fortune I built myself. And from up here, on my hill, the view is spectacular. The shadows I grew up in are finally gone, and all I can see is the light.